Hi, I'm Hilda Gottlieb with Creating the Future. In this flash class, I'll be sharing one of the three core practices of catalytic thinking, catalytic listening, listening that activates our brain's immense capacity for reason, creativity, and compassion. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit about how this flash class fits in with the rest of Creating the Future's mission.
Creating the Future is a collection of people around the world supporting each other in a grand experiment in systems change. That experiment is simultaneously simple and remarkable, as we're exploring how much more humane the world could be in just 10 years' time if the systems we encounter in our day-to-day lives are bringing out the best in each of us. Our work at Creating the Future is guided by catalytic thinking, a set of practices that put an intentional framework around the wisdom of the ages about what brings out the best in people wherever they are. Catalytic thinking is rooted in asking more effective questions, because changing the questions we ask is the most effective way to move beyond assumptions that keep people stuck. Today's flash class on catalytic listening is one way in which we're moving our mission forward, sharing a key practice for bringing out the best in people in any situation. Our hope is that you will implement what you learn in this class and that you'll share what stands out for you via social media, because spreading practices that bring out the best in people is our mission. So let's get started. One of the nicest things someone can say to us is, "You're such a good listener." Hearing those words is so validating. We love to feel that we've been helpful and supportive. We love that feeling of connection. When we're listening in a way that brings out the best in other people, it also brings out the best in us. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Sometimes the situation we encounter feels like it's no win from the beginning and only gets worse from there. See if you see yourself in this story. You're at lunch with your friend Mary. Mary works in the sales department at a family-owned startup that grew out of a highly successful Kickstarter campaign for new moms. Mary has been telling you for 2 years how much she admires her sales manager and the company founder. She often talks about how kind they are and how smart they are. She clearly likes the people she works with. Mary has been really happy working there, learning a ton and showing real talent in sales. The family members have all taken notice of Mary's talents, often telling her that she's a big part of why the company has been growing so quickly. And so, when Mary sits down to lunch with you, you ask her, "So how's work?" And Mary immediately begins to melt down. She describes this huge product launch with everyone working 24/7 under really tight deadlines. And in the middle of all of that, the founder's brother, Joe, came to Mary and told her that he wants to see data on their customers in a very specific format. Now, Joe is a top salesperson in a Fortune 500 company, and Mary has shared before how much she learns from him. She's also shared that he has trouble scaling down to think like a small startup, that he's so used to the high-end sales systems in his corporate day job. Well, the format Joe is requesting makes perfect sense in his global corporate world, but it's not anything Mary's team has used in this young startup. And that is particularly difficult right at this moment as they're preparing for the new launch. Whether or not it's this exact scenario, people come to us with problems every day. Depending on your job, they may come to you with problems all day, every day. If your job includes being a parent, that is definitely the case. Our natural response in these circumstances is to want to help. We might ask Mary, "Have you talked to your sales manager about this?" Or we might say, "Joe shouldn't be coming to you with this," or any other of a number of things that most of us would sense to do in this situation. So let's say that we make one of these fairly standard suggestions to Mary. Mary immediately tells us, "I already told my sales manager, and she agrees it's not appropriate, but it's family. And when my manager talks to the founder about him, she just shrugs and says, 'Yeah, that's Joe.'" Okay, so your first response wasn't the right one. You try another approach, to which Mary then argues why that won't work, and another, and so on, as you're just trying to help, and Mary's getting more defensive, until you realize that now Mary isn't just mad at Joe, now she's getting mad at you. At every turn, all we want is for Mary to feel better. And at every turn, all Mary is doing is arguing, telling us, "I tried that, and that won't work, and it's not that simple." Deep down inside, we're thinking, "Geez, if you didn't want my advice, why did you ask me for it?" Okay, deep breath. We have all had this happen to us. And if Mary is not your friend over lunch, but your kid or your spouse, The conversation may be even more exasperating. Don't you think I tried that, Mom? Do you think I'm a total moron? Of course I talked to him. I'm not an idiot. We've all had conversations that feel in flow, the conversations we never want to end, where things just feel good. And we've all had conversations like the one with Mary, where at every turn we feel frustration, anger, exasperated. What is going on in the good conversations that's not happening in the bad ones? And what's happening in the bad ones that's absent in the good ones? If what we want most is to connect, why do we so often walk away from conversations feeling disconnected? And importantly, because we've all experienced good, what would it take for those good conversations to be our norm, our repeatable go-to? First, because this is about humans, all those good and bad conversations begin and end in the brain. And so we'd need to understand the brain science of what's happening in each case. We'd also need to understand the chain reaction that is set off, both when we're in good conversations and bad ones, the cause and effect. And we'd need to have systems and practices that become our go-to for good listening. Every bit of human behavior begins in our brains. And so it's important for all of us to have at least a basic knowledge of the mechanics of how our brains work. The primary function of the human brain is survival. In addition, we humans also have a well-developed capacity for reason, creativity, and compassion. You can see from the slide on the screen that the brain's survival mechanisms are strategically located at the brain's gateway to the rest of the body, right atop the neck, alongside the brain functions that guide our ability to move. When danger strikes, our survival brain has direct access to the motor functions that will get us out of danger, without having to ask permission from the more rational parts of our brain, located farther away in the top and front of our heads. Our brains do their work through a series of electrical and chemical impulses. When the fear center is triggered, the brain releases chemicals like adrenaline, raising our heart rate and blood pressure, and generally revving our engines to get us out of danger quickly. Unfortunately, our brains can't tell the difference between physical danger and imagined danger. Picture what it's like when you have a nightmare. You wake up with that jolt of adrenaline, your heart is racing, you may even be screaming. Your brain's survival mechanisms have told your body to get moving, even though the danger is all in your thoughts. What that means is that when we feel threatened by anything, from physical or emotional danger to uncertainty, vulnerability, or ego wounds, our brains respond the same way they would if we were afraid of being physically harmed. In addition to adrenaline, when our brains sense danger, they release the hormone cortisol. Cortisol's function is to slow down all the other brain functions we don't need for survival, so those systems like our immune system and our digestive system aren't taking energy away from our ability to run away or fight. Our hardwired survival systems have allowed our species to survive, honed over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, and our species is still here, so those functions are clearly working. Now let's look at that other part of the brain, the frontal lobe, where our uniquely human brilliance resides, our creativity, our wisdom, our compassion. And specifically, let's look at what happens to that beautiful frontal lobe when our survival center is triggered. When that survival center releases the chemicals needed for our physical survival, there are two results that are important to our ability to listen and bring out the best in each other. The first is a function of adrenaline, which is to home in on the object of threat with laser precision. This is actually a physical response. Our eyes physically dilate, creating a very narrow range of sharp focus. Our auditory functions are also severely limited, and you're probably already guessing that narrowed vision is not just a metaphor. Fear and threat will narrow our ability to see the big picture, period. The other chemical result of being triggered into survival mode is a function of cortisol, because one of the non-essential functions that cortisol slows down is our ability to access the frontal lobe. That makes sense, as thinking rationally and creatively requires a lot of energy, and when we're threatened, our bodies need all the energy they can muster to escape that danger. Unfortunately, what that means when we are feeling threatened for any reason, physically or emotionally, is that our limited ability to think clearly is not all in our heads. It's a chemical response over which we have virtually no control. It doesn't take much to extrapolate from these few facts to see that when we feel threatened, our brains physically force us to react defensively rather than thinking creatively. The brain forces us to see only what is in front of us versus the big picture. So then, what is the answer? The answer is simply to make sure the guard at the gate stays asleep so that we have full access to our boundless capacity for reason and compassion and creativity. Because when that reactive, defensive brain has no reason to fire and we humans feel safe and calm, our potential is truly boundless. Before showing you how this brain science plays out in a conversation like the one we just had with Mary, it's important to focus on one more scientific aspect of life, and that is the reality of cause and effect and the power of chain reactions to maintain that cause and effect almost indefinitely. We all innately understand the principle of causality, that nothing in our lives just lands there, that everything is caused by something else. A chain reaction is what happens when that chain of causality becomes a loop, where the reaction sustains itself over and over and over. Once a chain reaction starts, outside intervention is required to stop that reaction. Picture a snowball rolling downhill, or a forest fire, a line of dominoes, a nuclear reaction, the viral spread of a disease. Unless the snowball hits a wall, or the forest fire is doused or runs out of fuel, it will keep going. And once that chain reaction starts, the longer it has been gaining momentum, the more energy it takes to stop it. We even use the expression, things will just continue to snowball in our daily lives, when we talk about something that, left on its own, will continue to get worse and worse. You can already see from Mary's situation that is what was happening in the restaurant. That unless something intervened, perhaps if we dramatically changed the subject or someone new came and joined us at the table, that situation would continue to snowball, rolling over Mary and my relationship on its way. Looking at the restaurant scenario through the objective lens of brain science, we see all sorts of indications that Mary is reacting from her defensive, reactive, survival brain. For most adults, it's hard to ask for help. And so when we open up and talk about what's not going so well for us, we're opening up to a place that makes us feel vulnerable. It's usually not a place of extreme discomfort, but if we felt confident about what to do in that situation, we wouldn't be asking for guidance. So Mary is feeling less than confident about her situation, plus she's feeling the power dynamic of how we feel when we ask for help, just a bit vulnerable. And so even before she starts talking to us, Mary feels uncertain, vulnerable, insecure. It's clear that part of Mary's feeling vulnerable is coming from feeling like the boundaries that are important to her have been crossed. She feels disappointed because she can't accomplish what she wants to accomplish. And she feels frustrated and powerless to do anything about it. We know this because Mary's telling us all about how she feels at every turn in the conversation. Now let's look at what we are feeling, because in this conversation, there are two humans with our human brains at the table. And just as we are having the conversation with our friend or spouse or coworker, there's also the ongoing conversation in our own heads. What we are feeling is the desire to help, to solve the problem. And we're feeling our own uncertainty about whether we actually can help. With each time we lob out a possible solution, we actually feel more and more uncertain, which quickly activates our own defensive survival brain. There's something else going on here, though. And that is that Mary's situation didn't happen in a vacuum, and it didn't happen overnight. There's a long story that has led to Mary's situation, because there's a long story that leads to every situation. But Mary isn't sharing that whole backstory with us. She's not sharing everything she's been thinking about it, all the ideas she's had and what happened with those ideas. She isn't sharing what she's already tried, the ideas she's discounted and why. Mary isn't sharing this in part because she doesn't want to bore us. And in part, it's because it doesn't feel immediately relevant. And mostly, Mary isn't sharing it because she doesn't even realize the extent to which this huge amount of context is even at play. And so what Mary is telling us is a very narrow piece of the whole puzzle. And because we want to help Mary, we react to the narrow piece she's shared, offering advice on that small piece of the whole picture. It's not because we want to focus on only one tiny piece of the puzzle, but because that's all the information she's given us. For every suggestion we make that feels perfectly logical given what we know, Mary, who does know the whole picture, is thinking, do you think I haven't thought this through? Do you think I'm stupid? Don't you think I've already thought of that? Or maybe she's thinking, yes, of course I tried that. Or, no, we can't do that. And there are 5 million reasons why not. We keep trying to help. She keeps getting upset. We feel inadequate and try again. By the end of the conversation, we're feeling pretty much what Mary's feeling. We're frustrated, perhaps feeling a bit wounded, all while we are sincerely trying to help someone we care about. That is the chain reaction we all so often step into. How many times have you had a similar conversation to this one, where you leave scratching your head thinking, what just happened here? What you can see now is exactly what happened. You can see that with each step in the conversation, both Mary's and our survival brains spiraled, getting more and more narrow and tunnel-visioned, more and more hurt, more and more uncertain. And while this is a pattern all of us have participated in over and over since childhood, our past does not have to be our future. We can, in fact, create conditions for both the Marys in our lives and ourselves to be at our best, to access that beautiful frontal lobe that houses our reason and creativity. We can communicate in ways that keep our survival brain feeling secure so that our threat mechanisms are less likely to fire. And by doing so, we can gain more consistent access to the rational, creative, compassionate areas of both your brain and the person you're talking with. The result will be conversations that help you and the person you're listening to see more clearly through the lens of reason, creativity, and compassion that are rooted in your frontal lobe. You will be helping both that other person and yourself see what the survival brain is keeping you from seeing as it hijacks your ability to see and hear and think creatively, rationally, and compassionately. The result is that you won't have to tell the Marys in your life what they should do, because Mary will bring out her own best self. Your job will simply be to create the conditions for that to happen. Catalytic listening is a practice for bringing out the best in the people around us and ourselves, making it easier to access the good stuff that is already there inside each of us. It is about creating the conditions for that best self to shine in ourselves and those around us. To be able to access the areas of the brain that house that potential, people must feel safe, heard, recognized. They must feel connection. And so catalytic listening begins with that connection. Asking and listening in ways that bypass the brain's fear triggers is a critical condition for accessing our creativity, compassion, and rational thought. However, what makes a conversation catalytic is where we go from there. Because it is at that point, when people feel safe and heard, that we as listeners have the power to open the door to their potential and our own. And that is what catalytic listening is all about. We are not pushing people through that door. That doesn't sound like it would make for a pleasant encounter for either of us. Instead, we're opening the door and helping our friends and family members see that the door is open so that they can step into their own best selves. We're doing that by the simple act of noticing. I mentioned earlier that one of the effects of survival chemicals like adrenaline is a narrow field of vision. What that means in our day-to-day is that when we're feeling insecure or uncertain, we literally cannot see anything beyond the narrow field of what is not working, the problem, the frustration, the powerlessness. Our big picture brains are literally hijacked by the chemicals released by our survival brain. What catalytic listening allows us to do is to see what that survival brain isn't letting us see. Instead of only noticing what is wrong and spiraling down in that chain reaction, we can also notice what is possible, what is powerful, what is important. And it is that noticing that makes catalytic listening catalytic. The act of listening is just that, an action. It's not just about hearing, it is about a range of activities that make us present to someone else. Hearing is what happens simply because sound is vibrating off our eardrums. Listening, on the other hand, is about hearing and speaking and seeing and thinking. Catalytic listening puts intentionality behind the recursive spiral that happens when we're listening. That intentionality is rooted in the second tenet of catalytic thinking, It's always about the people, never about the thing. Whatever the issue, whether it is your son struggling with algebra or an earthquake demolishing a whole community, the issue is not the algebra or the demolished buildings and streets. The issue is the people who are dealing with that. An earthquake would be just another natural occurrence if it weren't for the devastating effects on people. And the reason your son is struggling with algebra is not because of algebra. It's because of something that's going on with him. It's therefore important to remind ourselves of what seems obvious when we say it out loud. We're listening to people. And if we are going to open the door to the potential locked in our beautiful human brains, that is where we need to focus, on the people, not whatever the stuff of the conversation happens to be. That's important, so I'm going to repeat it. Catalytic listening focuses us on the person with whom we are communicating, rather than the problem or the issue of the conversation. Because if we focus on releasing the brilliance of the person or the people in front of us, we don't have to work so hard to address the topic of the conversation. There are two basic components to the practice of catalytic listening, both of which focus on the person we're listening to. These are not steps to be followed in order like a formula where you finish one and then move on to the next, because we humans are not linear and neither are our conversations. Instead, they're components within which we will weave back and forth as conversation flows naturally where it goes. We know that our brains will create a chain reaction of defensiveness and reactivity if they do not feel safe, so our first job is to make sure that survival brain doesn't fire. There are many ways in which we can help people feel open and trusting, and much has been written and taught over many years on those various techniques. In this short class, we'll touch on a few powerful practices, and we'll encourage you to spend time studying each one further on your own. The first practice, getting to know people as people, may seem logical, but it's surprising how little time we spend getting to know people beyond the surface. Especially in work environments, we tend to know people by job title or by work style, but spend little time getting to know them as whole humans. In fact, such relationship building is often discouraged under the assumption that it's more important to just get down to business. But when things mess up, we realize how much hardship could have been avoided if we'd spent time building trust and getting to know each other. There are many techniques for getting to know people as people. In staff meetings, we can do quick check-ins to see what folks are feeling. Wouldn't it be great to know that Dev is exhausted from a new baby rather than thinking he's mad at you? At the dinner table, we can ask, what was the best part of your day today? And so many more questions in every circumstance we find ourselves that can let us get to know the person behind the persona. Another practice that seems logical is the importance of remembering to listen. It may sound silly, but really this is a practice we frequently skip. How often do you only realize your spouse or child is telling you something important halfway through their story, feeling bad as you interrupt to say, "I'm sorry, honey, I wasn't listening." So I can't overemphasize the importance of looking up, taking a deep breath to center yourself, and focusing your attention 100% on that person in front of you. The practice of holding space is about listening with full attention to what the other person is feeling with an open heart, free of judgment. When we're trying to fix things or pass judgment or tell our own story, our focus is on the thing, not the person in front of us. When our focus is on that other person, we can be present to how life feels to them. That is what holding space is all about. That might mean simply nodding or saying things like, "Wow," or "That's incredible," or "That's big," or "I see, I get it." It's basically saying, "I'm here. I'm on this journey with you." And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that kind of support, you know that it feels great. From there, we can invite people to bring more of themselves into the room. Inviting is what happens when we ask questions that seek to understand the whole picture. Because as we saw in the example with Mary, we listeners cannot know the whole story of what the people in our lives are experiencing. And just as importantly, because of the tunnel vision that happens when we're feeling vulnerable or uncertain, Mary is likely not seeing the whole context either. The more we can invite someone to paint the full picture for us, the more we can hold space for what the people in our lives are going through. The simplest invitation is to ask, "Could you tell me more about that?" Tell Me More makes it simple to have engaging, inviting conversation without having to remember a whole bunch of questions or worry if you've asked a good question or a bad one. As long as we can remember to invite someone to tell me more about that, we can stay in the moment and continue to create an environment of caring and trust. The opposite of inviting is telling. Telling happens in so many ways. Telling can happen when the listener moves the conversation to themselves, noting, "That same thing happened to me," and going into their own long story. Telling can also happen in sneaky ways, by which I mean that telling is often disguised in the form of a question. Have you tried talking to your boss? Have you considered doing it this way? Well, it seems like an innocent question. In fact, we are telling that other person, "Here's what you should do," or, more to the point, "Here's what I would do if I were you." Just remember, telling is almost always about you. And it's also almost always about the thing, advice about the thing, or your story about the thing. Inviting someone to tell me more is about the person you want to listen to open the door so they can find their own wisdom. Once we have quieted the survival brain, we can focus on what makes catalytic listening catalytic. And that is the power that lies in what we as the listener notice and what we do with what we notice. This turns the act of listening into an act of noticing. And what we'll be noticing is all the stuff your friend would notice themselves if they had full access to their creative frontal lobe. That is worth repeating. Catalytic listening is about noticing all the stuff your friend would notice themselves if their creative frontal lobe wasn't being hijacked by their reactive survival brain. Just as it was with our friend Mary, people often talk about their problems and needs and conflicts. All of that is the stuff of the reactive brain, the brain that is worried about all the potential risks of life. If that part of the brain weren't firing, however, what we would actually focus on would be the results that person wants and the strengths and the values they have to build upon to achieve those results. What are they hoping will be different? What would success look like when the problem is gone or the issue resolved? What is working well? What is strong upon which to build? What values are they sharing? What is deeply important to them? The cool thing is that we don't have to ask about these things. People are already talking about them if only we were practiced at noticing that. What we are practiced in from the time we're born is going right down the rabbit hole with Mary, reinforcing and noticing what's wrong and trying to fix it. We're practiced at aiming our listening at the thing, whatever the situation is that Mary has raised, rather than the person, Mary herself. When we practice noticing Mary's outcomes, what she really wants, Mary's strengths, what she already has to build upon, and Mary's values, what is important to her deep in the pit of her soul, then we won't have to solve Mary's problem. She'll be able to activate her own rational, creative brain to do the job for herself. And that is what it means to bring out the best in someone, to create the conditions where they are at their own best. And again, that opening the door is the heart of this practice. This is not about forcing someone through that door saying, "Oh, come on, look at the bright side." This is not about turning crisis into opportunity or all those other cliches. This is instead about noticing what someone is sharing with you that they don't even realize they are thinking, so that both of you can see the whole picture objectively. And that will be creating conditions for your own best self to emerge. Rather than define and describe those three terms, outcomes, strengths, and values, let's show them in real time, going back to our lunch scenario with Mary. We've arrived at the restaurant, and Mary has begun telling us about how bad things are at work. Most of us living in the 21st century tend to be more in our heads than we realize. Sitting there with Mary, we're thinking about the guy who cut us off in traffic on the way to the restaurant and the project we just left at the office. So first thing, as Mary begins talking, we stop, take a deep breath, and remember to listen. We hold space for Mary by showing that we're listening, that we're on the journey with her, no interrupting or jumping in or telling our own stories. Because we know Mary so well, we know that the company started from a successful Kickstarter campaign with products for new moms. We know about the big launch they have coming up. And Mary has told us about the company founder's brother, Joe, who is a hotshot salesperson for a Fortune 500 company, and is asking Mary for customer data in a format that Mary can't easily access. This story would be a lot different if we didn't know Mary so well. Holding space for Mary, we're focusing on how she's feeling, the person in front of us, rather than focusing on the details of the problem she's describing. We might say, "Wow, that's big stuff to be dealing with during the launch." And Mary nods, "You bet it is. If this were any other time, we could work it out. But now?" And we nod and encourage her to keep talking. If she says something we don't quite know all about, we invite Mary to talk more about that. Perhaps it's about the conversation she had with her sales manager. Mary might say, "And I talked to Lupe, and you know how that always goes." And we get to say, "I guess I don't really know. Could you tell me more about it?" And throughout the conversation, if we need to, we remind ourselves to listen by taking another deep breath, because remembering to listen is always a great reminder. As Mary is talking, we're actively noticing. Mary's talking about her problems, but what she wants, if her rational brain were in charge, is the outcomes when that problem's no longer an issue. So while yes, what Mary wants in the short term may be that Joe leave her alone and let her do her job, in the long term, Mary wants to be able to do that job and do it well. She wants to have the same great working relationship with Joe as she has had in the past with all the family members. More than anything, she wants the company to succeed because she really believes the product is great for new moms and their kids. She wants to be part of that success, and she wants to love her job again. And we don't have to ask Mary about any of that. She has told us that. And while Mary has spent 15 minutes telling us what is wrong, she's also been telling us what is strong and possible and powerful. We know that she has a solid relationship with her sales manager and the founder, with all the family members. That is certainly a strength to build upon. We know that the founder, and pretty much everyone there, is super smart, super successful, and that they are generally kind and generous with their compliments about her work, that they're supportive of her and think she's doing an amazing job. And here's another big thing. If we shut off the defensive brain and listen with our rational, compassionate frontal lobe, Mary has also told us some great stuff about Joe. Joe is smart and successful, and he cares enough about his sister's company to spend a lot of hours helping them succeed. Whether or not he's taking the best approach at that, Joe is committed to this company and to his family. Joe cares. You can begin to see that while people are talking about their needs and problems and weaknesses and everything that is wrong, they are also telling us all that is right and good and strong and powerful. And we can absolutely train ourselves to notice that. This is not putting words in people's mouths. It is repeating back stuff they have told us that they are not even noticing because their defensive brain has taken charge, blinding them with tunnel vision to see only what isn't working. From there is huge power in noticing what is important to Mary in terms of her values. Values are the things that are important to us, the lines we won't cross, and the lines that, when we're forced to cross them, we feel uncomfortable, perhaps even feeling like emotional boundaries have been breached. Conflict is almost always related to a mismatch of values, the things that are important to us. And in all that people are telling us when they're sharing their woes, and those woes are almost always about conflict of some sort, they're telling us loud and clear about their values, about the things that are most important to them. Mary has told us so much about her values. It's important to her that the company be successful, not just because of the financial side, but because Mary really believes in the product. It's important to her that people get along and have fun and have good working relationships. It's important to her that people be respected for their abilities. She talked about how much she appreciated that the family members appreciated her. It also sounds like it's really important to Mary that everyone know what their role is in the organization and be given the room to develop in that role, and that she's feeling that in particular with her own job. And again, these are all things Mary has shared in one way or another during this and other conversations. And we know all of this because Mary has told us. She has told us all this great stuff about what is possible, her desired outcomes, and about what is strong and powerful to build upon, and about her values, and a bit about Joe's values too. Mary believed she walked into the room with a problem. The thing is that Mary also walked into the room with the answer. What she needs is the key to unlock what she already knows. By holding the space for her and inviting her to tell us the whole story and reminding ourselves to listen, we turned Mary's feelings of vulnerability into comfort in sharing safely. From there, We've noticed what Mary has been unable to see simply because her reactive, defensive brain had lopped off access to her creativity and compassion. Now, at some point, Mary may turn to us and ask, "So, what do you think?" Which is where we get to reflect back to Mary what we've noticed. Instead of making a whole bunch of our own suggestions, we can reflect back to Mary what we're hearing from her own beautiful, rational, creative, compassionate frontal lobe. Wow, it's obvious how much you love your job. If you can find a way to get past this, it would make everyone's life so much better, including helping the family not be so worried about the company's success. And then you could go back to loving your job. Mary may say at this point, "Yeah, that would be awesome. We really are doing okay if only they would see that." Well, it sounds like you've got a good base for that. Your sales manager and the founder and, well, everyone, even Joe, for all his faults, it seems like he really cares. Mary's likely to say something like, "Yeah, I know he does. He's been so successful in his day job and he cares so much, and he just doesn't know how to translate that to the work of this little startup. We talk a lot about that in our staff meetings. I know the founder sees it, and I'm guessing the rest of the family does too." From all you talk about it, I'd say there's a lot you love about the company. It seems to fit with a lot of what's important to you. With the recent exception of Joe, they seem to all tell you how important your work is to the company. That's such a gift. And Mary may chime in agreement, perhaps even telling us that Joe compliments her work all the time, and that it's just this one thing that's making her crazy. And you all seem to share the same values around how important the product is and the difference it can make, not just for moms, but for their kids. Everyone seems so committed, not just to the dollars, but what the product does for people. Mary may be nodding or maybe adding to the picture. We've reflected the conversation back to Mary in a way that puts the building blocks in place for what's possible. Mary might still ask at that point, "So what should I do?" And once again, we can invite Mary to tell us more. That's why I mentioned that this is not a step-by-step. We're always noticing and reflecting and inviting and holding space round and about because that's how conversations go. We might invite Mary to tell me about what you're seeing as the best option. Tell me what you've already tried. Tell me what others have suggested and what you're thinking about those options. Tell me what you're thinking about. And again, with tell me, you don't have to remember a list of possible questions. You just have to keep repeating, "Tell me." I might ask her to tell me about the values I've noticed as she's been talking. Tell me more about how you make sure everyone is respected for their abilities. Tell me more about how you guys ensure that everyone knows what their role is in the organization. I don't have to give Mary advice. I don't have to tell her what to do. I just need to ask her to dig down into what she has already said is important and to observe the situation from her rational, creative brain. If I urge Mary to talk more about the things she's already told me are important to her and the outcomes she wants and the strengths of the company, it's a good bet that at some point Mary will look up and say something like, "Oh my goodness, we spend so much time training our team. I got such good mentoring when I joined the company. But we haven't spent any time on what roles make sense for everyone in the family. If they don't know what's appropriate, how can they know what to do?"
I didn't have to give Mary advice she probably would have argued with. Instead, she is coming to her own ideas, not from the discomfort of her survival brain, but from that place of higher reasoning her survival brain had been blocking off. Whether Mary had gone as far as to find an answer to try, or whether she simply began to feel more compassionately towards Joe, or even if Mary just felt heard, at every point in the conversation, Mary's survival brain was being quieted. Her vision was opened up to see more of the whole picture, and the door to Mary's own wisdom and compassion and creativity was held open for her to walk in whenever and, importantly, however she might choose. And that is the catalytic power of catalytic listening, because it's not about the thing, it's about the people. Before you click off this video class and head on to the next thing in your day, research shows that taking a moment to reflect on what you just learned helps to embed the learning, turning it from theory into practice. So take just one more moment. If you took any notes while you watched, circle what stood out to you and make note of what you're promising to try.
We hope this introduction to catalytic listening entices you to begin practicing in your own life and work. Because listening is where it all begins, when our goal is to bring out the best in ourselves and those around us.